Winter, 330 BCE, a narrow gorge in the Zagros Mountains. 700 men stand between the greatest army on earth and the richest city ever built. For a month, they hold. Boulders crash down from the canyon walls. Macedonian soldiers charge into the narrows, and the gorge throws them back. 14,000 men cannot pass 700, and then a shepherd shows Alexander another way around the mountain. The defenders are surrounded. They fight until they are gone. 3 months later, Alexander burns the city they were defending. Every column, every painted relief, every carved lion guarding the gate. 2 centuries of construction, 1 night of fire. But beneath the inferno, in a mud brick basement that nobody at the feast was thinking about, 30,000 clay tablets sat in the dark. They were payroll stubs, grain rations, travel vouchers, a filing cabinet for a superpower, written on raw, unfired clay, administrative paperwork that was never meant to survive. The fire baked them hard as stone, and 23 centuries later, when archaeologists opened that basement, they found something the conqueror never intended to preserve: a woman's name on a payroll, and she earned more than the man beside her. This is the story most documentaries skip, not the columns, not the conqueror. The receipt. I'm Marcus Grant, and this is Wealth of Empires. $8.4 grams. That is the weight of a gold Daric, the standard coin of the Achaemenid Empire, struck at 98 to 99% purity. You could pinch one between your thumb and forefinger. On the front, a kneeling archer king with a bow and spear. On the back, a simple rectangular punch. Nothing more. No declaration of divinity. No portrait of a face. Just a guarantee. This much gold, this much trust. 1 Daric equaled 20 silver sigloi. 1 Daric bought roughly a month of a mercenary's loyalty. And by the reign of Darius I, these coins circulated from the Nile Delta to the Indus Valley, the first standardized currency to cross 3 continents. But the coin was just the surface. Beneath the platform of Persepolis, in 2 small rooms built into the northeastern fortification wall, a team of scribes was running something far more sophisticated than a mint. They were running payroll. The scribes wrote in Elamite, a language older than Persian, chosen precisely because it already had the vocabulary for numbers, quantities, and administrative categories. Roughly 1,000 tablets were written in Aramaic, the empire's common tongue, a handful in Old Persian, a few in Greek. As though the archive itself spoke in the accent of every people the empire had gathered. And what they recorded was not poetry or prayer. It was the daily cost of running a superpower. Grain rations measured to the quart, silver wages for specialists, wine allocations for religious ceremonies, travel authorizations for officials moving along the royal road from Susa to Sardis, livestock counts, feed schedules, temple offerings to gods whose names most of us have never heard. Let me be specific, because the numbers are the story. The tablets document a multinational workforce at Persepolis: Persians, Babylonians, Egyptians, Ionians, Medians, Indians, all on the same imperial ledger, not slaves. Paid laborers, this is not speculation, it is written on the receipts. An unskilled male laborer received roughly 3 quarts of grain per day. An unskilled woman received 2. But a skilled female weaver, a pashap as the tappers call her, could receive 6, double the unskilled man, triple the unskilled woman. That word, pashap. For decades, scholars translated it as simply specialist woman, a vague bureaucratic label. It was not until 2025 that researcher Yazdan Safai identified the Pashap as weavers, skilled textile workers, predominantly female, organized into working groups with their own supervisors, their own ration schedules, their own line items in the imperial budget. And there is one tablet, PF 1999, that records a wife receiving the exact same ration as her husband, not a bonus, not a supplement. The same pay for the same work entered by the same scribe. There is a conversation we have been having for the last 50 years about the value of women's labor. Apparently, a scribe in a mud brick basement had that conversation 25 centuries ago and wrote down the answer. Now multiply that single receipt across the entire system. Up to 30,000 tablets and fragments, covering just 15 years of Darius I's reign, from 522 to 486 BCE. 15 years, 30,000 records, and that is only what survived in 2 rooms. The empire stretched from Egypt to the Hindu Kush. 20 satrapies sent tribute to the king's treasury. Herodotus counted them himself. 14,560 talents of silver annually. Babylon and Assyria alone owed 1,000 talents, plus 500 eunuch boys, which Herodotus records with the same flat precision as the silver. The terrace at Persepolis was 450 meters long, 300 meters wide, raised 12 to 18 meters above the plain on leveled bedrock and rubble fill. 72 columns held up the Apadana, the audience hall, each one 19 meters tall, topped with double-headed bull capitals carved from single blocks of stone, and every surface, the columns, the reliefs, the lamassu guarding the gate of all nations, was painted red ochre on the soldiers' robes, Egyptian blue behind the winged disc, gold leaf pressed into the beards of carved kings. This was not a ruin. This was a functioning multinational headquarters, and every sheaf of grain that entered its gates was counted. But here is the question you should be asking. If this machine was so precise, so sophisticated, so modern in its accounting, why did nobody know about it until 1933? You saw the battle. Now let me tell you who was fighting it. The gorge was called the Persian Gates. Darvaze Yifaz, the last natural barrier between Susa and Persepolis. Not a fortress, not a city wall. A crack in the Zagros Mountains so narrow that 100 men could hold it against 1,000. The man who chose to hold it was Ariobarzanes, the satrap of Persis. The ancient sources claim he commanded 40,000 troops. Modern scholarship has quietly corrected that number. After the catastrophe at Gaugamela, where the main Persian army shattered on the plains of Mesopotamia, only a skeleton garrison remained. Ariobarzanes had his personal guard, local militia, and whatever survivors had straggled south through the mountains. 700 men, perhaps 2,000 at most. Against him, 14 to 17,000 of Alexander's picked fighters, the best army in the ancient world, fresh from 3 consecutive victories, marching through winter snow toward the richest prize on earth. Ariobarzanes knew the arithmetic. He held the pass anyway. His men had built a wall across the narrows. They stationed archers on the cliff ledges above. When the Macedonians charged, boulders the size of ox carts came tumbling down the canyon walls. The gorge was so narrow that numbers meant nothing. The famous Macedonian sarissa, an 18-foot pike designed for open-field phalanx, was useless. Alexander's cavalry could not charge. His formations could not form. For approximately a month, the greatest general who ever lived could not get through. It was Thermopylae, rewritten in Persian. And like Thermopylae, it ended with a betrayal of geography. A captured prisoner, or perhaps a local shepherd, the sources disagree, showed Alexander a mountain path around the gorge, just as Ephialtes had shown the Persians a path around Leonidas 2 centuries earlier. History was rhyming, and the rhyme was always the same. Every pass has a path around it if you find the right traitor to show you. Alexander split his forces. Craterus held the front with orders to attack at dawn. Alexander took his men over the mountains in a forced march through snow and darkness. At first light, they struck from the rear. Ariobarzanes was surrounded. His warriors fought until they were overwhelmed. His sister, some sources say wife, a woman named Youtab, died in the battle beside him. Remember that name, Youtab. She does not appear in the index of most histories of Alexander. She died defending a pass that most documentaries skip entirely, but she was there, and the sources recorded it, and now so will we. After the pass, Persepolis surrendered without a fight. The garrison was gone. The treasury was intact. Ancient sources report between 40,000 and 120,000 talents of treasure. The range depends on whether you trust Plutarch or Diodorus Siculus. 40,000 talents, at 26 kilograms each, is over 1,000 metric tons of precious metal. 120,000 mules and thousands of camels just to carry it away. Alexander had the treasure loaded and sent to Apadana. Then he did something else. The accounts describe a banquet in the palace, wine, music, Macedonian officers reclining on cushions that had belonged to Persian kings. At some point in the evening, a woman spoke. Her name was Thais. She was Athenian, a companion of Ptolemy, one of Alexander's most trusted generals. She stood up among the soldiers and made an argument. As Diodorus records it, she said it would be the finest deed in Alexander's campaign in Asia to join in a victory revel and set fire to the palace, wiping out the memory of Persian offenses in a moment. By the hand of a woman, the room erupted. Torches were seized. Alexander threw the first. The cedar beams went up within minutes. 72 columns, each one wrapped in painted plaster and gold leaf, became chimneys, drawing flame upward into the night sky. Burning embers rose hundreds of feet above the marv-dashed plain. Textile hangings disintegrated. The polychrome reliefs blistered, their pigment oxidizing in seconds. 23 tribute delegations, frozen in limestone, watching their own building burn. But beneath the fortification wall, in two small rooms that nobody at the banquet was thinking about, 30,000 clay tablets sat in the dark. They were raw clay, unfired, pressed into wet clay with a reed stylus and then simply shelved. Working documents meant to be read, amended and eventually recycled. The ancient equivalent of a filing cabinet nobody thought to lock. The fire above changed that. As the temperature rose, as the masonry crashed down onto the mud brick walls, the heat penetrated the basement, slowly, unevenly, and the raw clay began to harden. Not all of them survived. The fire shattered many. Others cracked, warped, or fused together. What remained was found in an extremely fragile and fragmentary state. But what the fire did do, through sheer accidental physics, was bake enough of them hard enough that they could survive 23 centuries underground. Alexander wanted a monument to destruction. He got one, but the fire that was supposed to end the story of Persepolis became the only reason we can still read it. 23 centuries passed. The rubble settled. The wind scoured the marv-dashed plain. And in the basement, the tablets waited. 1933. The same plain, the same mountain. An archaeologist from the Oriental Institute in Chicago, a man in a pith helmet and round wire spectacles, sweating through a khaki field vest, is supervising a trench along the northeastern fortification wall. His name is Ernst Hertzfeld. He has been excavating Persepolis for 2 years. His workers' brushes hit something in the rubble, then something else, then thousands of somethings. Tablets, packed together in 2 rooms, many of them broken, all of them covered in a dense angular script that Hertzfeld recognized immediately as Elamite cuneiform. He estimated over 30,000 tablets and fragments. They were shipped to Chicago in 1937, packed in crates, catalogued by the hundred, delivered to the Oriental Institute where they would sit and wait. One man took on the translation. His name was Richard Hallock. He published the first comprehensive volume in 1969, 36 years after the tablets were discovered, 32 years after they arrived in Chicago. 2,087 tablets in that first publication, roughly 7% of the total archive. Think about that. A man devoted the central decades of his career to 7% of a filing cabinet. The work continues to this day. The Persepolis Fortification Archive project, still based at the Oriental Institute, has published approximately 7,500 tablets so far. The rest, damaged, fragmentary, untranslated, remain in storage, and Iran has been fighting in American courts for years to get them back. When the translations began to appear, the scholars expected royal proclamations, decrees from Darius, grand pronouncements about the King of Kings. What they found instead was the cost of barley, travel rations for an official named Datia, authorized for a journey from Susa to Persepolis, 14 quarts of flour, 10 quarts of wine, grain distributions to work groups organized by ethnicity and skill level, payments to veterinarians treating the king's horses, temple offerings, 2 sheep and 30 quarts of beer to a god named Humban, a receipt for a courier's camel feed. Nobody carved these facts into stone. Nobody expected them to survive. They are the most mundane, most intimate, most honest records an empire can produce. Not what the king wanted you to believe. What the accountant knew was true. And buried in those receipts, between the sheep counts and the flour allocations, the proof that a woman named Pashap was worth more in hard grain than the man she worked beside. There is a pattern in how empires are remembered. The king commissions a monument, the army burns the city, the historian records the battle, and 2,000 years later, a tourist stands in front of a broken column and says, "Look what they built." But the real story of Persepolis is not in the columns. It is not in the Apadana staircase, or the Gate of All Nations, or the 100 stone pillars standing in a grid like soldiers at attention. Those were meant to impress. They were designed to be the thing you remember. The real story is in the basement, written on clay that was never supposed to last, by a scribe whose name we do not know, recording a grain payment to a weaver whose name we will never learn. That receipt survived Alexander. It survived the fire, the centuries, the wind, and the silence. The king's golden columns are rubble. The conqueror's torch is ashes, and the payroll stub is in a climate-controlled vault in Chicago, still legible, still precise, still counting. Every empire wants you to remember its monuments. The tax receipt remembers its people. Alexander burned the palace. He could not burn the archive. Because the empire lived in the basement, not the throne room. If this changed how you see the ancient world, subscribe. There is more to count. There always is.